And welcome back to the Awakening Philosophy Podcast. My name is Jed, and we are on a quest to discover what exactly philosophy is, how do we do it, and why. Of course, we're making the claim that philosophy is the most important thing we can do, and it is the most beneficial. It has the greatest stakes. So all of these things are reasons why we should care about philosophy. And we are getting the information from the horse's mouth. We are discovering it through the process of discovering something called the logos, the intelligible, understandable, and directly experienceable in some profound way. Underlying pattern, underlying movement, underlying purpose, underlying guiding path to reality. All reality. And because we're human beings, we have developed the ability to share in the logos. We've developed language and self-reflection. So we can awaken ourselves to the nature of the logos and follow it home. Follow it to two basic things, discovering and removing the cause of our problems, which lead us to our fate. Boo, fate. The inevitable, destructive, negative conclusions of the implications of if we don't follow the logos and instead follow the shadow of the logos, false beliefs. And we can use the logos to reach our highest goals. Yay. That we call destiny. So we are learning the logos, which is philosophy, and we're doing it through reading the texts of Socrates. Specifically, we're in the Phaedo right now, and Socrates, lucky for us, breaks it all down for us, gives us a doctrine of philosophy, gives the whole thing. This is what philosophy is. Wow. So also, as we've been going through on this podcast and this channel, we are not content with just learning what philosophy is. We're also doing its reflection. What isn't philosophy? Why? Because philosophy is one of the most understood things out there. And it's one of the most nefariously used. Using the corruption of philosophy, using what it isn't to push personal opinions or ignorance as though it is philosophy. Or even if it wasn't out of nefarious use, just misunderstanding. I thought this was philosophy. I thought this is what it was. A lot of people go to college hoping for something from philosophy and being disappointed because it was not what they were after. So, we're looking for what philosophy is and what it isn't. Freeing us from what it isn't and discovering what it is and reaping the benefits from doing so. One such benefit is, as we are going through in the Phaedo, understanding the nature of our souls and what is involved in having an experience called a mystical experience, where we separate our soul from our body because fundamentally we are not our bodies. And of course, because philosophy is something that involves two primary things: direct experience, we call knowledge, nous, and understanding, or the logos. This is not something about the soul we have to simply believe because we like the sound of it or because it's familiar enough with the way we were raised. No. We have to move from belief to understanding of why it must be so. And even that is a stepping stone to preparing ourselves to verify our understanding in direct experience. So it is something we can know with a capital N, not know in the colloquial sense or the slang sense, like I know how to ride a bike, not that kind of knowing through directly experiencing the soul out of the body. That as the object of knowing. Sounds like fun? Sounds interesting? Well, so if these are the benefits we get from philosophy, from understanding it and practicing it rightly, there are also other benefits we can get from this process. One such thing is understanding the ups and downs, the problems, the difficulties we're having in our life. Now, of course, that's the anti-logos, or the shadow of the logos, and how it's playing out in our lives. In other words, understanding the puzzles and difficulties we face in our everyday life. It applies universally, it applies collectively, it applies individually, and it applies in our everyday world. One such example of that is pop culture. For instance, there is a meme debate going around right now. I'm dating myself. Probably by the time you're watching this or listening to this, it will be out of fashion, because these things only tend to stick around for a couple of weeks. But the one in fashion right now is asking women if they would rather meet in a forest while they're alone, a bear or a man. Would you rather run into a man alone in the forest or a bear? And of course, most women are saying, I'd rather run into a bear, to tell you the truth. And as a result, some men are reacting in the very way that would show why they would prefer to run into a bear. They tend to, some of them tend to react very hostilely and negatively and aggressively, and so on. So, how can we use philosophy to make sense of that? Well, that's a good question, and it's always fun to understand our everyday world through philosophy. It makes things clearer for us, because the logos that we're learning through philosophy for our personal development and our psychic or spiritual development is the same paradigm that is used to understand everything. That's the fantastic thing about the logos. Doesn't take favorites, which is also one of the unifying things about philosophy. Anybody can be open to the logos. In fact, everybody should, so long as you're a member of a species who've evolved intellect, language, and self-reflection. You're in the game. Of course, as through this podcast, we have recognized that, those are the three big, that's the big triad, that's the big papas, the self-er triad, the three highest aspects of self. The self-logos, you could say, represents language. So we are applying our understanding of the self-triad, or the excellence triad. What's the excellence of being a living being? Language, or self-logos, which is language, words, reasoning, communication. Oh, welcome to the chat. I get in the chat, I get the bear and why they pick it, but I pick the man because I can't overpower a bear, and that has the best reaction so far when guys hear it. Also, hi, welcome to the chat. Thank you for joining me. Always glad to see you here. Right, so the three, the big triad, the big three, to understand ourselves, but also understand the excellence, because as philosophers, we seek excellence. We want the ultimate, we want the highest. We have a mind, we want to know what it is and how we can use it. But also, what's the excellence? What's the highest reach of the mind? We are a soul. How can we be the best soul we can? How can we not scare women if we happen to run into them in a forest? In other words, what's the virtue? Another word for excellence, you could say, is virtue. What's the excellence of ourselves? How can we be good people? Of course, that's one of the aspects of the doctrine that we've been learning, and that also that virtue of the soul can upgrade into a certain kind of virtue which we can take with us into our next lives. So it's a kind of learning that is eternal and immortal, which is another reason why philosophy is so important, because, hey, you're going to die. I hope this isn't the first time hearing this. I hope I'm not the one breaking the news. If so, I apologize for being so crass. But our physical body will die, but our soul is immortal. at least according to this doctrine, at least as something we trust, because of the logos, until we understand why it must necessarily be so. And then again, even that is a stepping stone to direct knowing and confirming of our understanding. That's what we're doing right now. By practicing it, by coming back to these videos as much as we can, going over the text as much as we can, sharing our thoughts and insights like I'm seeing in chat, and I appreciate that, is a development and preparation of our understanding to confirm it through knowing. Socrates says it's a kind of purification that we're going through to make us receptive to the divine self, opening the gates to allow us, or invite us into the participation of, or the sharing, not participation, we're not taking a part, we're sharing in the soul separate from the body. So we have been developing understanding of the self-triad, excellence, the virtues, especially the virtue that can upgrade into one we can take with us into our next life. Because if we're here to do anything, it's probably that. Not to amass a million cars, as some billionaires tend to do. They can't take that with them to the next life. And if we are eternal and immortal, and we go through cycles of reincarnation, as we are seeing for ourselves in the Phaedo, rationally, then that wouldn't make sense to spend our life doing that if you can't take the cars with you. So, the excellence of what? Logos, thinking, language. It's one of the corners. The second one, the excellence of mind. What's the highest reach of our mind? What's the nature of reality itself, if reality is essentially all mind or consciousness? Then ultimately, what is that which shares in mind and shares in logos and can use them together? Use thinking and mind together. Use understanding and nous, understanding and knowledge, dianoi and nous, logos and direct experience. Use them together in a way to reach our highest destiny and know the self. Know the self which is beyond even the immortal, which is a fascinating thing to imagine. Can you imagine that? Beyond even the highest experience. Necessarily so, because something had to cause even the first experience. Ooh. And that use of knowing and understanding together applied to the realm of being is the virtue we call wisdom. Seeking it at all times with every part of your soul, so you're unified in your desire for it, the virtue of temperance. Holding on to what you learn about it as your planning, as your paradigm upon which you plan, wisdom. And doing this at all times, justice. And as pointed out in the chat, there is an upgrade from that as a learning and practice through the logos into the virtue that is eternal, called phronesis. One of those, or all of those, the currency for which we trade those virtues that we put into ourselves, the excellence of ourselves, the currency we trade them for is phronesis. So we've been asking the question for a very long time, what the heck is that? And why is it the upgrade? And why does it not lose its power? Why is that the kind of learning and development we can take with us? What the heck is it? And someone in the chat has an idea about what it might be. And so please share that and I'll read it out. Or hypothesis. Keep in mind, we're developing questions and we're developing hypotheses. These are ifs. And of course, we use the hypotheses in our dialectics. So we start a dialectic. If phronesis is this, what follows? And if it isn't, what follows? And going through that process is the exercise of the spiritual discipline, the mystical discipline of philosophy, but also will help us learn more about the subject we're interested in. So what is phronesis exactly? So excellence draws us into the game. Excellence of logos, excellence of mind, excellence of self. Either will bring you in, but all three we want to master. To be what you need to be when needed. Interesting. Right, one of the consequences of phronesis is a kind of functioning, an effortless, spontaneous, fully unified functioning, most appropriately for the situation. Right, and so in the chat, they're also adding to that idea as a possible hypothesis for what it would be like to function with phronesis is. And the way that you do function in that way with people is according to what they need. So bringing in the idea of benefit. Being able to recognize or diagnose or understand where a person is at, which would have to be relative to a paradigm, which we call the logos. Understanding that, learning that is the virtue of wisdom. But then functioning with that to benefit them would be a kind of just functioning. So bringing in the idea of benefit. So, what were we saying? We were saying that philosophy is open to everybody, so long as they're at the level of development where they have these three kinds of things: language, mind, and the ability to reflect both upon the self, the ultimate. All the things that we do are meaningful in philosophy in that they refer to and help illuminate the self. In the chat, adding to the hypothesis of what phronesis is, a kind of knowing without just understanding. Interesting. Without even calling it knowing. That's an interesting idea. If the development of philosophy to our goal of the two things Socrates has been saying, truth, which of course is the realm of being, which we can only experience when we can separate from the attachment to the body, which is of course ignorance if we identify with our body. But also the second thing that Socrates has been saying all the way through is we love phronesis. Lover of learning, lover of wisdom, philosophy, lover of phronesis. So if understanding and knowing are our ways there, then maybe those two cognitive functions, uses of our mind, upgraded to a different kind of knowing that's, you wouldn't call it knowing and you wouldn't call it understanding. Interesting hypotheses. I like it. In the chat, the self is higher than the soul and mind. I get that. That's good. What do you see in that idea? So, with all of that, we're understanding what it is, how we do philosophy, why we should care, also what it isn't, because that can get in the way. Someone can say, oh, that's not philosophy. Philosophy is just your own personal opinions. Okay, taking away knowledge, taking away understanding, taking away the two pillar stones of philosophy, and of course, taking away all the other stuff that you can't have without those. You can't have the idea of phronesis. You can't have the idea of the virtues. You can't have the upgrading of the virtues. You can't have the mystical experience. Pretty much just destroying philosophy as a whole by saying philosophy is just opinion. So it's important to be aware of that so we can navigate ourselves justly and benefit ourselves. And one of the questions we've been asking lately is, in the logos, there seems to be a kind of ways of understanding differences. Sometimes two things are different, but come up together, like left and right or hot and cold. And they seem to be opposites on the same level, on the same kind of thing. But there's another kind of relationship we've been discovering is inherent, is part of the pattern of the logos that we're learning, which is different levels. So they're not opposites on the same level, but one is lesser and one is greater. lesser and greater. And the metaphor we've been using is a mirror reflection. A mirror reflection of you, not the opposite of you. It's very close to you, but it's the lesser version. It's diminished version. It lacks what is vital, specifically those big two, knowing and understanding. Your mirror reflection can't know you. Your mirror reflection can't understand. Curious too that the reflection of philosophy, or what philosophy isn't, specifically, it's just opinion, it's just concepts. These are the big things. My personal philosophy is this, right? And another way of going is, oh no, it's philosophy is just rational. That's why we learn Kant and Hegel and all these big words and these complicated books, so we can think only. Takes away the nous, takes away the knowledge. And of course, the way that they're thinking isn't the logos, because the logos has much more than simply logic and reason. It's curious, isn't it? We also recognize that this greater and less has actually a third term. It's kind of a triad in itself. Lesser, greater, and equal. But equal to something ultimate, or whole, or greater even than whole. So this is a kind of relationship. Of course, that we can use that to understand the three parts of the self, the three excellence of the self. The self-logos, is that the lesser that leads to the greater experience of knowledge of a higher dimension? And then even that can lead into the ultimate of the oneself beyond even knowing. So we use things that can't have opinions or interpretations or subjectivity. That's right. You might start with something that Socrates calls trust or true belief, which of course are not varied based on opinions or perspective, but as a way of starting. You have to sort of trust that Socrates has something to say to even pick up the book. Trust that it's worth going through these arguments. Trust that it's worth trying out the doctrine of philosophy until, of course, you understand it. You understand how and why it must be so, necessarily and beautifully. Of course, we have been seeing that the ways of understanding, the ways that we judge understanding, so that we should change our mind from our false opinions to the true logos, themselves use the logos. Even in judging something, you are judging according to reason. Where did that come from? Have you ever seen reason walking around on two legs? It's not a physical thing. There's a certain justice or necessity in the arguments that should change your mind. There's even a certain beauty in the arguments coming together as a whole. And even a certain goodness, a benefit that results. Goodness, justice, beauty, necessity, reason, rationality. These are all ideas themselves that are not of the physical world, but of the world of being. So even in the act of thinking and learning and changing your mind, developing, implied is the realm of being. You necessarily so. So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy in the sense of a self-confirming. It's inherent in everything. So that's a pretty magical thing. So we've been talking about how not only can we use it for these most important goals and understanding thinking itself, understanding development itself, we can use it to understand popular culture things. And one of those relationships, and we're talking about whether you would rather run into a man or a bear, and we're connecting it to these two kinds of opposites or correlates. Two things together, pairs. And let's take a look at this on the board. So we've got got some notes of this earlier. Let's bring it up here. So, opposites. You can come across concepts or even self-ideas, and you might say, hang on a second. Left and right. They are opposites. One isn't inherently good and one bad. They're kind of on the same level. On the same level. On the same level. There's a fancy word for meaning of this on the same level. That's called commensurate. Commensurate. That's just a fancy word. It's a really cool word. Commensurate. One way of explaining what commensurate means. Oh, in the chat. If a person has high phronesis, their own logos with self tame and teach themselves. Oh, that's a nice implication. So in the our friend in chat is developing a hypothesis of the phronesis. So you'd have to give a definition of his hypothesis. If phronesis is this, if phronesis is this is how it would function to others. This is how you would function in many different areas. So this is the implications or the functioning implications. And we've already talked about some of those. Like how phronesis would relate to your cognitive functions. Maybe it would unify knowledge and understanding. But then we're on to the next category, how with that functioning, having been unified in that way by phronesis, so this is like self itself, you're defining the S term. That defines, so this, just to make it clear, this is your defined, so you've just defined it. So this defined self term becomes the subject of the next category. How does that phronesis you've just defined relate to something else? And we're relating it to cognitive functions in our dialectic here in the chat. So how does this defined self relate to something else for other? So for this other, we're picking cognitive functions. It unifies our cognitive functions, or maybe our self. And that's probably better. How will it relate to our soul? Our individual soul? And it can unify our cognitive, so functioning implications, unify our cognitive functions, unify knowledge of a knowledge and understanding. Then, having been unified in that way, we go to the next category, which is division. This is definition, self SS, definition, demonstration, SO, and then O to other O's, that's division. So now we're in this category. How would we relate to other people? We would function. We talked about functioning in according to what they need, which also means benefiting them. If that benefit, based on what they need for their, is based on a paradigm of the logos, then we could even bring in the Greek idea of art, artfully. But also within this same category, so this is one. This is why it's division. You can divide it in lots of different ways. How do you function to others? But how do you function back to your own learning? It's another one. You can have many divisions. That's the division step, which is also good because this is the step where you outline all of the arguments to prove your point. That's where we're in the Phaedo right now. Socrates is outlining all of the arguments that follow, all the divisions for why learning is recollection. So in the chat, we've got how one of the others, we're dividing it up. So again, define phronesis itself. And this comes to the next one. How does it function? Towards another, we're saying that's the soul. Unifies our functions and our abilities. Upgrades us to a higher cognitive function. This is all a hypothesis. This is all an if. And then how does it divide up? Benefit others, but also how does it relate to yourself? Oh, you can teach yourself. You can help yourself learn. You could be your own guide using the high phronesis and the logos. So using phronesis and logos and self-reflection, you can teach yourself. This is another other to other. Fast learning. You can learn fast. That's important too. We only have a certain amount of time here, especially because we have a physical body that can pull us in every way and can get sick and distract you from philosophy. So learning fast is important. You can become a natural genius, sure. Like how most people can't understand what a dog is saying. But I've lived with dogs my whole life and they do talk, but I can't tell you how I know. But it works with all dogs, same with cats. Interesting. So it might wake up as certain, so others to others. So one of those divisions. So we've already got division 1, other people. Division 2 was, we don't have to write this, it's obvious. Other people. Division 2 was how it relates to teaching yourself. Division 3, learning fast. Division 4, understanding animals. Intuitively. Sure. Who learns though? When I'm learning, I'm not the one taking the information, only recalling it. So this goes in. So another division of what follows. Raises or births good questions. Like the one that was just birthed in chat. If this is what I'm going through, which is of course, what am I when I'm learning? Am I the one learning? I'm the one recalling. So in the chat, raises births good questions about self and learning and recollection, which is the very questions that will inspire us and motivate us to keep reading in the Phaedo, which we're going to be doing today. Dogs talk with their faces and body. It's like a background process. The PC you have, it's a background program. So this is the dialectic that you are developing of an if statement about phronesis, which is important. Why? First of all, clearly, you're unifying all of your ideas. You're bringing it together. You're collecting all of the various different insights or understandings or theories you have about phronesis from all that you've talked about with your friends, from all that you've reflected on your own, and importantly, from the texts we've been reading, the Logos of Socrates. So Socrates is one of our friends that can help with our learning and insights. So you're bringing it together. That's one benefit. You're also learning the process of thinking, which is kind of like upgrading a skill. So whatever you apply your mind to, you're going to be able to think in a more cohesive, unified, structured, helpful, beneficial way. You will end up learning more fast. As you teach yourself other things, you'll be able to use this dialectic pattern. Interesting. So, part of the theory from the chat is it's kind of the background process. So this would be in your definition of what phronesis is. So it's kind of like a background process. And you can use analogies like a PC. Use analogies if you like. Right, this is like working a muscle. So you're unifying your understanding Number one, you are learning the dialectic itself. Of course, there's one more category to go, which is after all of these divisions, pick out something that is the most significant to you. It could be the most powerful, the most important for your development, the most interesting, the most causal, the most primary, metaphysical, so then has the most effect. Then you take one of those key elements, or it could be one that unifies everything. Often if it's the most primary, or causal is a good word, causal, then it will unify everything, because that's what being primary or causal is. Metaphysically primary, we're talking about here. Primary, metaphysically. It unifies or synthesizes. That's YNTHESISEIZE. It synthesizes your division step. So you find one of those, and that becomes the other of the others, that becomes the other here to relate back to your subject. So this is this last stage. Right. So where would you throw, within the structure, where would you throw this idea? What category would you put it in your dialectic? Is this idea of an unknowingness defines self to self? Is it the functioning towards you, the implications of its functioning? Is it one of the divisions, how that, with that new functioning, how you can function to other things, to other people, to yourself, to your learning, to understanding animals, to raising questions? Or is it the final category? Is it one of the most important one of these, one of the most important ideas that is most primary or causal or important or interesting, that you take from this step, and then you take it all the way back to the start to understand phronesis in a new way? That's the last stage. Other, back to self. See how it turns back upon itself. That's a ousia. And of course, it's not a stagnant ousia, because having gone through this, and I encourage you to do it yourself, don't just copy and paste mine. You need to exercise yourself. That's the fun part. By having gone through that, you can use this interesting idea or primary idea or causal idea or unifying idea. You use that to understand your subject in a new way. So you've learned. So it's not a stagnant ousia, but it's an ousia that turns around upon itself and goes up a level. Goes up. Upgrades. Right, it's the logos in its reversion. You're reverting upon these higher terms, not the unfolding. Yes, you're also understanding how the universe unfolds, but you're at the part of evolution, because you've got logos, mind, and you can reflect ousia upon self. You can return home, revert back to the higher. Now, what happens is, well, if you've gone through this and you've got a key idea from this stage, which can allow you to understand the definition phronesis in a new way, that means you understand phronesis in a new way. Which means what? Time for a new dialectic. You do it again, because you've got a better understanding. Hey, so do a new dialectic. Share the new one with your friends. Meaning, not only does it revert up, you go through the ousia process again, and you turn around and then go up, and then you turn around, do it again, and go up and go up and go up. This is the process of development. Self-reflection upon yourself with the self-logos, using your mind to understand yourself in an ousia way. That's the game. And look at all the benefits you get along the way. First of all, you are understanding the dialectic, so you can think better. That will help you learn in a faster way. By the way, you said this. I'm using your own dialectic to point to what was inherent in you. Bringing forward your logos. As Simius and the Phaedo said, I don't know this theory of recollection. Can you give a demonstration of it? Cebes wasn't able to, but he said, well, I know that it's possible because I've seen people who ask questions in a way that draw out the logos, draw out the knowing of other people. And then, of course, Socrates jumped in because he's the one who can do it. Equally so, we could ask, well, what's the benefit of going through this process? And we can draw out from the logos shared in the chat. It allows you to learn faster. Why? Because you're developing the structure of learning. 1, 2, 3, 4. What else? You can teach yourself. Literally, that's what this is. You are teaching yourself. This is another benefit of having done it. Hijacking the person. Well, you're asking questions. It's up to them whether they want to play. So Socrates said, where are you at? Like, do you want to play? You don't have to. I'm going to ask you questions. And if you know enough about the logos to know that I'm not doing the opposite of philosophy, doing the negative version of philosophy, I'm not trying to manipulate you to win the argument, because that's what people do if they don't have the true logos, because without the logos, you don't have a paradigm for truth. Therefore, you can just manipulate. That's what's left over. If you know I'm not doing that, do you want to play? I'm going to ask you questions. And that will draw out your own logos and your own knowledge. In the text, we have it here. So this is right back before Socrates' division into the arguments of learning as recollection. Here, Simius interrupted. Hey, what proofs do you have to show this theory of learning, Cebes? I can't quite recall them, Cebes says. There's one excellent logos that shows this. When humans are questioned, if they're questioned in a good way, and so again, question in a good way. What's the good way of questioning? Dialectic. And they answer out of selves. So the other person has to be on board too. Good faith. Then everything they answer they possess. This could not be possible if they did not innately know knowledge and write logos. It's like only a page or two beforehand, before where we are now. Equally so. And Socrates made sure you have to ask the person. So, what are the other benefits? Drawing from the logos that you had. All I did was ask questions. I didn't tell you anything. I didn't judge any of it. All I did was show you the order where you can put them in your own dialectic. What else do you benefit? Well, by the way, if you do this, you will be able to give yourself a way of teaching yourself, which is this. By the way, by doing that, you benefit from this process. You yourself use the idea of a PC as a metaphor. You can develop a mythology using metaphors to create stories or to explain it to others. You can be quite artful in your use of metaphors. If you have learnt the structure of the dialectic, you can use it to be artful in your art. Another benefit of going through this, hey, you raise other questions that might not be directly related, but are still really important. Like the questions of the self. Who is it that's learning? And what is this learning for recollection? How do I have all this in me already? Another benefit. Why are questions beneficial? This is the other reason why we do it. Because not only are we, number one, unifying our understanding. Let's write this down. Number one. So what's the benefit of this? Benefits of this. Of playing this game. Well, we said, it helps us unify our understanding. Whoops, run out of space. Let's get some space this way. Unify our understanding. It also helps us learn and practice the structure, the dialectic. Which has the consequences of helping us, which therefore helps us learn all other things better. And faster. But also, it's a question. It's an activity that focuses your life force or attention or consciousness, whatever fits. On a single question. Which does what? Let's jump into the text. Actually, we've got it as a quote, I think. This one? Contemplation, if you prepare yourselves by most accurately understanding dianoia, each of the selves, you approach closest to the nous of each being. That's the kind of purification. So this activity has the, and there's the next quote here. When we do this, when we unify ourselves in a way away from the physical body, we can be liberated of the phronesis of the body, by the divine self. So, what does that do? What's this significance of going through this? Unifies your understanding, learns and practices the dialectic, which helps you learn other things better, but also it prepares and purifies soul for direct direct, intuitive, mystical experience, which we call in Greek, because there's no English word for that, nous or ousia. So these are all the benefits from having gone through this, by taking all the things, the ideas that you shared in the chat, and unifying it according to this structure. Right. So maybe that help you to spot other selves and where they're at their level of development. Probably might be in this category here. Figure it out. Figure out where you can take all of the things you shared and put them within one of these 4 categories. Or one of these 3 categories, and then from the last category, pick out the idea that you think for you sheds more light on the subject. This is the other back to self. This is stage 4. Definition, demonstration, division, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Synthesize and analysis. Synthesize means take something from the division step. Analyze means refer it back to the self. Other back to self. And there you have your 2 sticks you can rub together. Rub this idea or concept or unified concept or causal idea or whatever it was that you think was most illuminating from the division step, how it functions in all sorts of different ways. Rub that against your definition of phronesis. Rub the 2 sticks together and see if a spark comes. See if it triggers an insight. Number 3. An insight, by the way, is just a level or a quality of nous, ousia. Keep doing it, and the insights will be greater and greater until they are the ones that blow your socks off. Insight is of the nature of enlightenment. It's just a question of degrees, which brings us back to what we were talking about, of the level of enlightenment. So, of the level of the same quality of, is another way of saying commensurate. So let's move this down here, over here. Insight experiences you get from finishing your dialectic and rubbing it against your original idea, other back to self, is something called, is an insight that is commensurate with. So this is our first kind of relationship that we've been talking about. Kinds of relationships. Of pairs or connected ideas. Okay, commensurate. It's another way to talk about commensurate is milliliters and gallons. They're talking about the same thing. Incommensurate is something of a different level or a different kind of thing. So you wouldn't say how many gallons of the marathon did you run? It's not commensurate with distance. Meters and gallons are incommensurate. It's a cool word to put into your inventory. It's going to be useful. Why? Because another kind of relationship is lesser and greater, which actually has another term because it's a triad. It's the archetypal relationship of the unfolding of the logos and ultimate, or as Socrates has been saying in the text, equal, self-equal. Let's just say equal. which is what? Incommensurate. Or different levels. And the example? In the chat, reflecting. Oh, okay. So you're doing the final stage from that reflection that you've just done. We've shared together. You're taking something that stood out the most when you went through this, and you're using that to understand what phronesis is in a new way. That's the last stage. That's others. All these others that we went through, back to self. Ingetted. So this is the chat. It's like thought, mind, intent, sense, knowledge, understanding, consciousness, intention, purpose. Is there a way of unifying that? Or is one of those the most primary? Are one of those ideas explaining the others? Or do all of them have something in common? Which of those is most interesting or most powerful or most unifying of everything you've done? Or most primary? There are a lot of things a lot of metrics you can use to pick what you want for the last stage. Oh, you're going to use an old English word. Okay. Yeah. Is there an old English word that unifies all of those things you've brought to the surface through the dialectic? You can use that. Because this is the fourth stage we're doing right now. Other back to self. Okay, so back over to here. The two kinds of relationships, left and right are opposites, or lesser and greater. Or ultimate and equal. So we are asking, okay, why are we talking about that? Well, Socrates points out that this opposites one is kind of what plays out in the physical world. The physical world. Oh, it's too big. The physical world. Things are generating, or they're going between the opposites. We've got hot and cold, or left and right, or growing and decaying, like growing and decaying. Right, so there's this back and forth motion and force in this realm. Make sense? You get hungry and then you get full. And then you get hungry and then you get full. Socrates talked about this earlier when he said, isn't it interesting, at the start of the dialogue, isn't it interesting how pleasure and pain are connected in the physical world? Let's go back to it. Yes, the world of becoming. You're becoming from one to the other. In fact, that was one of the arguments that he used in his to show that there must therefore be an afterlife, because if in the physical world we see a coming to be dead, and the physical world is the interplay of the forces between the opposites, there must be a coming from the dead or coming to life. Otherwise, nature would be impotent, lame in that way. Therefore, there must be somewhere where we're coming from. That was one of his arguments to show that the soul must be immortal. Before we got onto this idea of learning as recollection as another argument. But earlier, right in the start, going all the way back to page 7, page 6, page 5 even. Here we go. Listen to this. With this idea of the physical world being a back and forth force, or kind of logos, kind of movement, kind of principle, but of a kind of logos of the becoming world only. Or especially. Think of that, the opposite, back and forth. This is Socrates at page 5, like one of the first things he said. Actually, I think it is the first thing he said. He said, okay, Phaedo, here, page 4, Phaedo said, oh, by the way, you can get the text yourself. There's a link underneath if you want. Phaedo said, I'm going to describe from the beginning everything that Socrates said. He went in, he found Socrates released from his chains. His wife was sitting there with his baby. Interesting. He's 60 something, and he's got a newly born baby. His wife is saying, oh, Socrates, this is the last time your close friends will talk to you and you to them. The first thing he says, Credo, take my wife home. I mean, I feel a bit sad for her. And then the second thing he says is this is the thing we're looking at. Keep our relationships in mind. How strange, says Socrates, O men, this thing seems to be which human beings call pleasure, and how wonderfully it is naturally disposed to that which is believed to be its opposite, pain. Since, on the one hand, they will not come together at the same time in the human self, but on the other hand, if anyone pursues and catches the one, they are almost sure to necessarily catch the other also, as if they were unified together from one summit. And then he goes and talks on about a myth that Aesop's fables used. He said, if Aesop was to create a fable, a myth based on this, he would say that God wanted to reconcile the warring opposition of those selves of pleasure and pain, but since it was not possible, united their summits to the same, which is the same word as self in Greek. And by this, whichever one may be present, you'll find the other later. Thus, the same recollection also seems fitting for me, seeing at one time these chains which were on my leg caused suffering in my leg, but now the pleasant have come to life shortly after. Fantastic summary. As a myth, he talked about looking at myths. He himself just gave a myth of the warring opposition of selves, or the back and forth of, what is it? Opposites. Believed to be opposites. Meaning opposites in this realm. Okay, cool?
Wow.
So, interesting. He gave us a heads up. And now where we are in the text, he's bringing it up again. Where are we? This is where we are. So he just talked about because of this, we can necessarily say that as we can see a being alive and we can see a coming to be dead, its opposite must exist for that interplay. Specifically being dead, so there must be a state of being dead for our souls, and a coming to birth. Therefore, showing that there has to be a place. Our souls are immortal, and the process is cyclical. So you can say it's an argument that shows the necessity for reincarnation. Okay, but then he goes on. Simius asks him, say more about the theory of recollection, which is another argument to show that we must have an immortality because we must have grasped knowledge of self equal before our perceptions. Therefore, before we were born. Necessarily grasp self-knowledge before we were born. Not just for equal, because we've been using sticks as equal. You see two equal sticks. You never see two equal sticks. It's like it, but another way it's unlike it because they're not quite equal. Equality itself will never be mixed in that way. It will always be equal. You won't say equal itself is unequal. That's crazy. But saying for equal itself, greater and lesser, and all beings. For our present logos is not any more about the equal than self-beauty and self-good, good self, and justice and holy, and all of the beings that we can stamp the seal, that which absolutely is. So all these things that we're saying exist absolutely in the realm of being include beauty, goodness, justice, holiness, and also another set of terms, equal, greater, and lesser. We use these in asking questions and answering them. So make sure our questions, our dialectics are about these kinds of things. Rarely should you be doing a dialectic on whether or not Brad Pitt's suit at the Oscars was good or not. That's not one of these ideas. That's of the physical world. Right. Yes. And he has been using the you're right. And so another argument was using being awake and being asleep as an analogy to understand being alive and being dead. So we wake from a dream, so too must be wake from our life. If the afterlife is more real, that which absolutely is. So even that as an analogy was a kind of, that's analogy itself is of this kind of relationship, lesser to greater. Why? Because we can say the lesser, being asleep, is to being awake, has a relationship to, these are the two kinds of relationships, keep in mind. It's a kind of relationship to being dead and alive. Or vice versa. Maybe being dead is more like being awake. But this is the greater. So we wouldn't say being asleep and being dead are opposites. It's a lesser to greater relationship between the two, which allows for analogy. So it's an analogy. This is the lesser to greater kind of relationship. Okay, and we have a question in our back pockets that we've been going along with. To bring this all together, our question is, let's go back to it on our notes. Is it opposites or lesser, greater, equal for knowledge? Forgetting to remembering, or our ignorance, which is what? An unknown destructive loyalty to what we believe is knowledge, what we believe is truth, the image of being, justice, beauty, etc., that we have been seeing in the text is the cause of our worst injustices or vice. So, what we call for that, the word for that is pathologos. So applying these two kinds of relationships to knowledge, applied to our question of knowledge, to the question of knowledge. if we are aware that we don't know someone, or we don't remember something, we are aware that we are forgetting, but we are learning, we go through a learning process, which we are seeing involves, make a different color, which involves asking questions, answering from ourselves, like being genuine, good faith actors, we call it nowadays. And the last part we just got, we use that which absolutely is for asking questions and answering questions, which includes this category, lesser, greater, and equal, and also the category of goodness terms that we seek. Okay, we don't have a name for these two categories yet, but beauty, goodness, justice, these are things that we desire. We want beautiful things. Everything we do is because we think it's going to be good for us in some way. So loosely speaking, we could give it a temporary name until we discover more in the text. The kind of self-er terms. Self-er means terms that absolutely exist in the realm of being. Good related self-er terms. Equal, greater, and less. We got to think of a name for that. I don't know yet. It's an open question. So we use that for so we use self-er terms. All of this we call, and we follow the DDAS or the S to O structure. We call this the dialectic. The process through which we learn. So we go from a forgetting to a remembering. And that is knowledge. And if we really know it, we should be able to give account of it. We should be able to give a logos of it. Now, is that a movement we go through life of one to the other, opposites? Is forgetting the opposite of remembering? And then next question is, what about the other kind? So is this the opposites? Which is the force in the physical world. Now, what's the other kind of movement? Lesser to greater. So let's say, and now, lesser to greater. Which is what? Incommensurate. So what's the version of that? Well, what do we call that which is like knowledge, but misses the key elements, specifically logos and being, not using the logos, not using the self terms? So we should put in logos over here. Uses the self logos. dialectic. So we go from forgetting to remembering. What are we realizing that process is called? The dialectic. Asking questions, answering from ourselves, using the self for terms like beauty and justice and so on, using the DDAS or SO structure, using the self logos. Oh, there are also other things because we recognize that this was the mystic yoga of separating the soul from the body. So all of the other things we can include in there as well. So the Sox yoga. So separating from physical senses. SENCES. So yeah, we can go back and add all of these qualities to what makes the dialectic. We just saw right then, asking questions and answering from ourselves, using those self terms like beauty and justice and so on, using the DDAS that we just outlined in our dialectic on what phronesis is that we got from the chat, using the self logos as much as we know of it, and also the things related to the spirit, the mystic side of it. Separating the soul from the body allows you to do this better. It's a way of unifying our understanding, as Socrates says. Let's bring up the quote again. I need to go back and find more quotes because there are so many good quotes earlier about unifying our understanding and so on. You approach closest to the intuitive. So all that stuff, right? It's dialectic. Now, that's fantastic. Good for us. So our question is, what about the other kind of relationship? So if this is relationship 1, oops, let's make it white. If this is relationship 1, what about relationship 2? The incommensurate one. Right. From the chat, what Socrates called the shadow. What has the shadow? The other word he used was outline. And the word that we've been using from our metaphor of the mirror, reflection, of the greater into the lesser. I have no idea what that is. This is a method that somebody used to separate himself from his body, hanging himself from a tree for 9 days and 9 nights. With a spear in his side. I do not recommend that yoga. Oh, Odin, it's a myth. Oh, it's a myth. Right. Norse myth. Okay. Well, so long as each of the elements in that is an analogy. In other words, it's a lesser, it's not true, to point to the greater. So the tree should represent something. The rope from the tree should represent something. Odin himself should represent something. So every part in that myth should have a lesser to greater equivalent in the truth. And what we're learning here is the truth. That's why we study philosophy. That's why we're reading the Phaedo. We're getting the truth that we can then make our own mythologies and represent it. So, what is this second kind of relationship, lesser to greater? Well, the greater is, of course, knowledge. The greater is knowledge. Is to what? So we talked about there's one kind of movement we do in our physical world, from forgetting to remembering. Those are the opposites, like being asleep and being awake. But then there's the other kind of relationship, which is like being asleep to being dead. It's not going from opposites, it's going from greater to lesser. So, is it sleep to awake or sleep to dead? Or if you think being dead is more alive, you could say sleep to being alive. Sleep to awake or sleep to alive? Well, we've got our... So let's say sleep. Our sleep to awake is opposites, and our sleep to alive is our lesser to greater. Yeah. If we're talking about separating from the body as death and purification, and as what the art and practice of death and dying is what philosophy is, and that's our purpose, and that's living our life well, as Socrates is saying, and it's a purification from ignorance, and we're encountering knowledge in that way, and that which absolutely is, then being dead seems like the higher, the greater, and being alive is like being asleep. So, sleep to awake, opposites. Sleep to alive, lesser to greater relationship. So our question is, apply it to knowledge. What is the shadow or outline or reflection of knowledge? Has the appearance of knowledge. Or has a loyalty to it that is like our loyalty to knowledge if we have phronesis. So we have here, so appearance versus truth. So the lesser is the top line. Appearance versus truth. So everything we know about knowledge, we can find its reflection. Okay, what is it? We have a we see it as the paradigm. We see knowledge as the... Let's give the greater first. The greater. So within knowledge, we have its truth. What's its shadow? Appearance. It's the paradigm. What's the shadow version of a paradigm? Prejudice, maybe? What would you call is the shadow, the diminished reflection of a paradigm? Interesting story. A script? Maybe an NPC script? Following that paradigm can lead you towards your destiny. The opposite of that, of course, is fate. And then we can go through all of the... Go through all of these aspects of the dialectic. So we ask questions. What's the opposite of asking questions? What's the shadow of that? Making declarations. Or giving advice. You've got nous. What's the opposite of that? Certainty. I'm certain. I'm not changing my mind. Answering questions. What's the opposite of that? Silencing conversation. Silencing questions. Silencing questions and shutting down conversation instead of answering questions. What's the opposite of dialectic? Debate. Or even worse, debate, or attack, or us versus them thinking. Okay, that's enough. We can keep going. We could create a huge list of everything we've learned about knowledge and see what's its reflection. Now, our question is, what can we make? Let's take all those. That's kind of like other to other. That's division. We've divided it into all its parts. Now, can we synthesize synthesize it into one thing? What's something that is like knowledge, but is the lesser? That is that something that can take all of those terms and somehow unify it. What's something that has the appearance of truth, that keeps us stuck to a script no matter what happens, that causes our destructive playing out of our fate? And people in this game don't ask questions, they give advice. Let me give you advice. Or they make declarations. This is true and I don't care what you say. They don't have nous, but they have its shadow. They have a certainty. They feel like they're confident and they're right if they can act certain. The Dunning-Kruger effect, we call it. They don't answer questions, they silence questions, and they shut down conversation. They don't do the dialectic, they debate, they attack. Yes, opinions. We add opinion in here too. They don't use understanding, they relate to opinion. What's that called? What unifies all that? That is our sleep to alive, greater to lesser for knowledge. That's called the pathologos. The opposite of the self-logos is the pathologos. Right. Pride. They want to win. They don't want to bring everybody up like Socrates does with his friends. Opinion. Right, so you could, yes, let's add those in from the chat. It's not artistic in the Greek sense that benefits, but they want to win. All of these, so this would be the other to other stage in our dialectic. And now we take something from that unifies it, pathologos. And now synthesis, but does it relate? So that's analysis. Does it relate back to our subject? Yes. Imagination and pathologos, right. Imagination, the negative kind of imagination. Because we play out our pathologos, our fantasies. This is why our sexual fantasies especially, but any fantasies, adds power to our pathologos. Right, so yes. So if there is a trust in the logos as a step towards acquiring knowledge, remember Socrates says we have to trust in his doctrine and repeat it to each other often. Trust in the self-logos. There's its opposite, allegiance, blind loyalty to pathologos. Right? My cave versus that cave. America first, Australia first. What racism first? Right? It's just manifestation. All of those things that are normally tied to conservatism or right-wingism or fascism. The Nazis, all of the fascists or strongmen that seek power, like Trump is doing now. Like, I mean, lots and lots of countries around the world have people like this. They appeal to this, a blind loyalty to your pathologos. Your family is best family. And if the ruler looks similar enough to your dad or whatever, then, you end up voting for a Hitler. So again, we're using this to understand our everyday world. So, in the chat, there's a scene that kept popping up and resurfacing, and I faced it. The parent was the cause. I felt physically light and had a weird head-ringing feeling. That's cool. That's really good. Yes, so you could say you went through using your dialectic to return back to the cause and you addressed them. And I assume with addressed them that you meant you used your words, you used your understanding, you referred to all of the things we talked about in the dialectic. You talked about your highest goals. Hey, I can't reach my goals. This is irrational. Maybe you're in that process of imitating someone. Maybe you're just doing what your dad did to you. By the way, what's it like? Maybe you asked him a question. Hey, what's it like being stuck yourself? Do you always want to be like that? Right, these are implications. This way of being causes suffering to those who listen to you. You do all of these things. Pick out whatever's relevant. You act certain. You just try and give advice and make declarations. You don't ask questions. You've never encountered noose. When I bring it up, you shut down the conversation. You try and attack or debate. You always want to win and you're not being artistic. Yep, good for you. Yeah, and it has a physically light. So the greater you get at the dialectic, the better that you can have that conversation. And the further you get along towards your goal, the more of them are going to come up. But that's okay, because the further towards your goal, that means the more of the dialectic you know, meaning the better you can answer them. So it's kind of like the further you get into a video game, the better you are at playing the video game. So the video game maker will give you trickier puzzles to solve. Otherwise, it would get boring. So as we go towards knowledge, the pathologo surfaces. And we can use this, what we use to go from forgetting to remembering, to address them. We have a better skill set, an upgraded character. Oh, the parrot now looks physically smaller. Yes, absolutely. Very good point. You feel lighter, and you can use your understanding of the Phaedo to recognize, it's almost as though I'm less tied to my physical senses if I feel lighter. And their appearance is less intimidating. And in my imagination, they're not as big as they appeared. Yes, very good. And then you can take all of those questions that you asked them and unify them together, which is other back to self, which is what we talked about, and say, hey, you are not the teacher. Because of all of the things that I've pointed out in my division stage or other to other, the conclusion is you are ignorant. You have the shadow of knowledge. You're just following the pathologos. I understand you, but you can't understand me because you lack. Because you can go from forgetting to remembering. You can go from forgetting knowledge to having knowledge. You can't go from pathologos to knowledge if you're holding on to the lesser. You have to upgrade. That's why it's a lesser to greater upward movement or incommensurate movement. You are not my teacher, and I am not following your lessons. Yes. So now you're more peaceful. Consequence from having applied the dialectic to addressing the cause of the pathologos. So, we started this whole talk by saying, these are all the many benefits. Becoming physically lighter, becoming more peaceful, no longer being a slave student, a lesser student to an ignorant teacher, which frees you from your fate, from your problems. But also we use philosophy in the dialectic to go from forgetting to remembering knowledge. But I threw in another one at the start of this talk. We can use it to understand popular culture or our current world. You're never an angry person, but now you can aim. Right, you can aim the force of your... Well, it might not be anger anymore. Maybe it's a kind of thumos. Because anger might be tied to the idea of should. Like if somebody bumps into you on the bus and it's a crowded bus, you wouldn't get angry because you don't think he should have done anything differently. Or if like somebody who has a disability bumps into you, you wouldn't get mad at them because you don't think he should have been different. But if some perfectly able-bodied person bumps into you on a bus when there's lots of room, you might go, hey, you shouldn't have done that. You get angry at them. But maybe the more we understand the nature of our human quest, our philosophical quest, to go not only from sleep to awake, forgetting to remembering, but also to move from being asleep to alive, going from our pathologos to the actual logos, we'll be able to see everybody simply playing out the dialectic of their problem. Self to self, that's their problem. Self to other, how does it affect their state of mind? Other to others, what's their functioning to others? What's their relationships like? Other back to self, they'll end up thinking of themselves in a certain way. Self-fulfilling prophecy. Their life is the dialectic playing out in real time of a false hypothesis. Yes, and pointed out in the chat, a principle of this is it's harder to see your own, easier to see in others. So if somebody has a similar pathologos to you, it might be harder to see and you're more likely to get triggered. Which might seem unfair, but if we're here to give birth to a problem, then maybe there's a kind of in the journey of our reincarnations, it's kind of good that somebody comes over and like presses your button to remind you you've still got more to see, to make clear. So everybody is either playing out the implications of the self logos or their pathologos. Their self-logos in some point of their journey from being born and forgetting to accepting the philosophical quest, awakening the self-logos, the self-dialectic, and awakening philosophy, and going from forgetting to knowing, or they're stuck because they have accepted the lesser shadow, outline, or reflection of knowledge, and I've already got there. And grifters play into that. That's their MO. That's what they do. You don't have to do anything because you're already the best. They all do that. Why? Depends on who they're talking to. Oh, you're a white person? Oh, it's because you're white. Oh, you're American? Oh, because America's number one. Oh, because you were born at this part of the world? Oh, because we are the chosen people. Make America great again. The way that we were in the past. You were always great. So, we're either doing this or this. The two kinds of conversations. We're either having fun playing this game of going from forgetting to remembering and having a lot of fun while we do it and becoming better as we do it. Better to ourselves and to anybody else. Or we have given up on this game to accept the shadow, the image, the outline, which is the pathologos, which is also, while this journey is the cause of virtue, so this causes virtue, we saw in the text, Socrates went out of his way in his doctrine of philosophy to point out this shadow is the cause of vice. It's not a not knowing. It's not simply being unaware or for having forgotten. Trump at the Libertarian I haven't seen that at the convention. I heard he was doing something crazy. I haven't seen it yet. Right. Here's a good insight. If one of the characteristics of our pathologos is we didn't learn it through the logos, we learned it through appearance, because if we reach truth, okay, Socrates, the whole time he's been saying, what are we after as philosophers? Two things, truth and phronesis. Truth, which is the knowledge, and somehow applying it to our virtues to making it our own, self-phronesis. Those are our two goals, according to Socrates' whole doctrine. And how do we get to the truth? The logos. What motivates our virtues all the way along until we have this initiation into the true virtue? We trade in like we trade in our money for the true currency. The logos. Temperance, following the logos, desiring the logos. Courage, holding on to the logos in the ups and downs, the pleasures and pains, the movements of opposites in an everyday world. What's wisdom? The logos. How do you be just? The dialectic, which is what? The power or the use of the logos. How do you get to truth? You keep doing that as a practice, as a habit with your friends, like Phaedo was with his friends, meeting every day at like 6 a.m. or whatever it was to talk about the self-logos until the guard let them in to see Socrates. So in other words, the logos is our way to truth. The pathologos, therefore, didn't have the logos. Oh, I will check out that video. That sounds funny. If it didn't have the logos, it can be hard to see. We're oblivious of it. That's one of the qualities. We could add that to the qualities of the pathologos. Blind to it or oblivious to it is an unsuspected false allegiance, which is why you can be grifted on. That's why all of the grifters are right-wingers. Well, not all of them, pretty much all of them. So one of the criticisms against the left, of course, it's not right and left, it's pathologos and logos. The left has yet to embrace the true logos, which is why many people say, but the left have problems too. Of course they do, because they're in this game as well. If they are truly progressive, what we mean by progressive is using what were the three aspects of the self? The self-logos, applying it to self-being or self-mind, and then recognizing even those are a reflection of the one self. There's our self-triad, which is another way of saying, how do we use it in everyday world? Using the self-logos, learning the self-logos, separating from the body as much as we can in Socrates' doctrine to be closer to being or truth. And that happens through a self-reflection or self-ousia, reflecting on ourselves. So if we do that, which requires from the very beginning the self-logos, and even if the left doesn't have the self-logos because they haven't read the Phaedo yet, they haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, hop, 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 hop. They can at least start by trusting. Here, trust in the self-logos begins the start. Whereas blind loyalty, they're not even aware of it, to the pathologos is the diminished reflection. If you can do that, use the self-logos with your mind, away from your senses, in self-ousia, you learn more about the subject. That's the last thing. Other back to self. You start from the self itself, you see how it functions, you divide it up into its arguments, and you come back around to the beginning. But you have started here and you end up here. You have progressed. If you are a progressive party, you should be doing the self-logos and the self-dialectic, because this goes from lesser to greater. Conservatism means, by definition, this is not a personal opinion, it means to not progress, to stay where you are, stagnant, which means you will get stuck in your pathologos, because by definition, humans get pathologos. Everyone, even in the chat, they're talking about recognizing it and seeing it. Oh, in the chat. Who is richer, a man with 1,000 gold, a man with many fields and flock, or a man who has a signed copy of the Phaedo? Yeah. Who are you going to get to sign it, by the way? So that's the right verse, the logos. You can stop saying right and left, because right and left implies this. A movement from forgetting to remembering. But the thing is, we have to ask the question, is the right-wing parties, the fascist parties of the world, are they actually aware that they have forgotten knowledge and are seeking it? So let's do it. Ask our question. Question. Are right-wing or conservative or fascist or dictatorship groups aware let's say what is it? Oh, relationship 1 aware they are here to learn, which is remember, and moving to knowledge through logos. Or asleep to awake movement. So movement of the physical world. Socrates, as we saw, even Socrates says, hey, in this physical world we have pleasure and pain, like all things, which is, like all things, the opposites. We believe them to be opposites in the physical world, in the realm of belief. But he said, Aesop would say, God saw this and found a way of unifying their heads together, which would mean out of the physical world. There is a separation from the movement of these physical forces in the realm of becoming that exists in the realm of being in the physical world. Okay? Or are they R2? Or are they R2, which is stagnant, a dead to asleep, or asleep to dead, let's say. Asleep to dead. Stagnation. Stagnation. Tied, stuck to loyalty to inherited false belief, and shadow of knowledge, and not seeking true knowledge through the logos, self, logos, and dialectic. Oops. There's our question. The logos is dual, meaning to create and discover at the same time. Right. In using what you are where you are in your logos, you are learning as you go. A sleeping body is just like a dead body. Right, that's that number 2. Which one is it? Is the conservative movement or right wing? That's our question. So thankfully, we've been playing this game, and if you're still with me, thank you so much for enjoying this and being with us. I hope you're enjoying it. If you've come along this far, you've recognized that there are 2 kinds of relationships, primarily, at least, that we've discovered so far. There is the awake to asleep movement of the physical world, pleasure to pain. There's another one Socrates gave us. Just the forces of the world of becoming. And that was a necessary thumbs up. Necessary argument to show that, therefore, as we can see, a being alive state and a process of coming to be dead, it implies there must necessarily be a being dead state and a process of coming to life. Therefore, reincarnation, a cyclical movement, necessarily. But we've also seen Socrates say, hey, let's look at the vices. There are some people who are really good at doing bad things. They have a kind of shadow of temperance, sound-mindedness, because they've mastered some pleasures to be really good at doing other ones. So they've become more bad at doing those things. Same thing for courage, and same thing for wisdom that we saw in book 7. Then we ask the question, interesting. Right, in the chat, by the way, if we go through this movement from forgetting to knowing, it has an effect on our state of being, our functioning. Sometimes there's a state of flow state. You just kind of act appropriately by sharing the logos, which is important to acknowledge, number 1, but also to wonder about, what is that state? Is there depths to that state? Can I be more in flow? Where does it come from? So we can be in it while wondering about it. In fact, wondering is a good way to hold on to the question and the state. Right. Using our self-logos terms to ask the questions. Is this a whole, or is it a part of a greater whole? So we asked a question earlier. Where were we? Oh yes, devices. So if there are kind of phronesis, a shadow of phronesis of sound-mindedness, to master some pleasures but to be mastered by others, vice. You're really good at doing that terrible thing. A kind of courage, look at him run out the army all on his own. Well, it's because he had no choice. Necessity. But also he only did that scary thing because he was fear of something worse happening to him. It's not really courage. And we saw wisdom, a certain clarity of sight, caring for yourself, a kind of seeing and planning and understanding, but towards your own personal physical body benefit. So we asked the question, what is missing? The reflection or outline of a shadow of the virtues, the vice version of the virtues. We saw what's missing, similar to what's missing in our reflection in the mirror. Will, understanding. It could be summarized, you could even summarize it in two aspects. The logos, understanding, directed towards being. So your understanding isn't the understanding, it's not the logos. And you're directing it towards the physical body. You're pursuing your physical pleasures. So it's not actual sound-mindedness. You're not pursuing being and the logos, and so on. So that was a question from earlier, but it's coming up again here. Because we are asking the question, is the right wing or conservative or fascist or dictatorship groups aware that they are here to remember, and that's learning, and are themselves moving towards knowledge through the logos, the movements of opposites in our physical world, asleep to awake? Or are they in the other kind of relationship, the lesser to greater relationship? They are, instead of moving from forgetting to knowing, they are stuck because they want to believe their false beliefs, their ignorance, their inherited false beliefs of knowledge is actual knowledge. They already know everything. They're not here to learn. They know everything, and this is right. And it was the way it was in the past. In which case, they are not doing what they're here to do. They are stuck in a pathologos. By definition. Because they're the lesser to greater. They can't seek knowledge because they've accepted the lesser in place of the greater. And we have seen that that is the definition of vice. They are the vice party. And are therefore harming their souls, and they're not aware of the harm, or they don't care about the harm they do to other people. That's the game. And what is grifting? Notice how all the right-wing grifters, the Shapiros and the Crowders and the etc. of the world, Schnieko, are all appealing. Some of them know that they're doing it. They don't actually believe the crap that they say. They know it's to make money. But they appeal to this crowd. You don't have to go through the life, fulfill your life purpose and go from forgetting to remembering through the logos and therefore master the dialectic. The thing that we did today, this thing here, we did a dialectic on phronesis, and we benefited in many, many different ways. You're already the bestest ever. All you got to do is just believe me and give me all your money. Which causes them to act against their own interests, which is why it's a grift. You're actively harming someone for your own personal interests because they are being distracted from their true purpose. They're not actually as great as they're being told that they are. And they become more entrenched in their shadow or outline, which is their vice. And because it's a byproduct of our human evolution of caveman days, it's my cave versus other caves. So there is you can get people to lack empathy for other people because they are us versus them. The wanting to win side. The attack, the us versus them. We've already seen it, us versus them, which is a way of dehumanizing people, not seeing the self, not seeing the self logos, the self truth, so you can actively harm other people, which is why every single war starts by giving an us versus them image, appearance, not truth, to the team, that to the group, that the fascist is trying to trick you into hating, while he grifts both sides. War is lose-lose, always. Why? Because they are lying, whether they are aware of the cause being their pathologos or not. Most, if not, I'd say almost, I say most, are aware that they're lying. Politicians know that they use terms that refer to the caves, us versus them. That's why they use family values. They mean your family. They're not going to be specific because they're trying to grift a lot of people. So they just use something general. You fill in the details, but I mean us, our cave. I mean your vices. I mean your pathologos, that you have blind loyalty. Every family says, my family's the best. My dad's the best. In the chat, my dad could beat up your dad. My mum's a saint. Yo mama jokes. That's why they're all so provocative. So we can use these two kinds of relationships. Just two. So simple. Opposites, movement of opposites in the physical world, which is forgetting to remembering, or the shadow. We have a shadow. We have mirrors and reflections. We have information in our physical world that points to the second kind. Right. Your mum is the one. Yes, harming them is harming yourself. Absolutely. And they're trying to trick you. Two kinds of... It's very simple. Isn't it so simple? There's just two things, the logos and pathologos. You could say there's a third in your mythological representation, but it's so simple. And even in the philosophy, there's two aspects, the logos and nous. Understanding and knowledge. Relationships, there's just two. There's the opposites in our physical world, or there's the incommensurate movement. Hey, notice, we can use our word commensurate. Why? Because these conservatives are blocked from knowledge. Why? Because forgetting to remembering are of the same level. That's the word commensurate. Here we go, commensurate. Opposites on the same level. The physical world of growing and decaying, back and forth motion in this realm. Lesser and greater is different realms. Incommensurate. How many gallons in a marathon? You can't ask that question. How do I hold on to my pathologos, my racism, my prejudices, the past was good, and still evolve to knowledge and reach my self-purpose? You can't. They are incommensurate. Lesser to greater, they're of different realms. Okay? Just by definition, isn't that good? I'm not going to read that out loud, but funny. Okay? Well, yes, you could say, you could find some clever, how many gallons of water? Yes, in the chat, someone's saying, you could say, how many gallons of water did you drink in the marathon? But of course, gallons is not commensurate with meters or kilometers. Incommensurate. So, our question is, do conservatives accept that they are progressing from asleep to awake and therefore are on the same level as knowledge? Or are they the second kind of relationship? Which of the two? Are they stuck? Do they claim to be the right? Do they claim to know everything? Do they claim to be the ones who are the best? And do they use a language that speaks to us versus them cave mentality? Do they use the second? Do they accept the lesser to greater of knowledge? So they can't move to knowledge. They want to act as though they already are knowing as already. Do they play on certainty? Does Trump say that he wins every single golf tournament he's in, therefore never learning how to become better at golf? Yes, famously so. It's everyone who plays golf with him says he always cheats. He gives himself these fake-ass trophies. He doesn't want to get better. He's already the best. He is stuck from learning. Everybody says that about Trump. He never learns his lesson. Ever. And here, because we have the logos and the dialectic, we can understand why. He is a caricature of the second kind of relationship in regards to knowledge. He's accepted the lesser and cannot reach the greater. As same for Hitler, as same for everyone. In fact, that's what the word conservative means. That's why they always say the past was great. Bring back the old values. You mean the old values where there was racism, where there was there's still racism, where there was obvious segregation, where women couldn't have a bank account? That's the world you want? They'll say, oh, well, no, those things are obviously bad. But yeah, I do want that. So you want what is actively bad, not just for others, but for yourself, because you live in a world with those people and you are being oppressed. Yeah, they're saying, oh, because you're a man. Notice that conservatism, women don't like that almost universally, because they're actively opposing women's rights. Why? Why do they give a shit what women do with their bodies? Because it's just a way of saying men are better than women. Hierarchically. So our irrational cruelty towards women is a scam to get men to realize that they are actually way down the ladder from those who are rich. The rich get rich by definition through capitalism, which is externalizing costs and internalizing personal profits. In other words, exploiting people and the planet. That harms men and women. But they give these little ridiculously unjust things of a old bygone age, like take away women's reproductive rights, take away women's rights to work in the workplace, take away any rights of women, so they can give men a higher status than women as a way of distracting them from actually addressing the causes. Why? Because that's knowing. What's knowing? Oppressing others. Why? Because the lesser version of knowing is harming others, because that's what it means to win. If you have a winner, you have a loser. That's why people defend people who are harming the whole human race, like Elon Musk and Bezos and stuff. It's comically harming the planet. It's ridiculous. It's so easy to see. Why? Because they like the idea of this shadow of knowing. How does true knowing manifest? Benefiting. All the things in our dialectic we did on phronesis. Helping others, benefiting others artfully, learning yourself, teaching yourself, understanding animals, understanding how you relate others to others. Benefit. That's virtue or excellence, benefit. What's the conservative version? The vice version of benefit is harming. Vice. So they think knowing shows itself. How can you show that you are the knower without the logos and knowing, and therefore without what's needed for art and benefit? Harming others. The ability to inflict suffering on other people is a way of giving the appearance of knowing for those who reject true knowing. That's why they're sadists. That's why they seek war. That's why they want to harm immigrants. Like, why do you want to harm immigrants? I don't know. There's something appealing about being the one. And there's a internet meme. Leopards ate my face. Famously, these same people, when those rich people who convince those men to act against their interests by giving them the carrot of you get to harm women, you get to harm the black people, you get to harm the immigrants, while we harm you systematically, when they realize oh shit, they're harming me too, there's an internet meme called Leopards, the leopard that I voted for ate my face. The face-eating leopard party that I voted for, the cruel right-wingers who want to harm people and put everyone in jail, they want to harm me. The people who stormed the Parliament, the White House, they want to put me in jail, but they told us that we can be unjust to other people. That's why I voted for them. Leopards ate my face. You voted for leopards, but you didn't realize you're being scammed. What's the scam? Offer the carrot of the sick idea of knowing, the pathologos, which manifest as cruelty to others. Notice how a lot of people in positions of power with guns, like the American police force, tend to do a lot of bad things all the time. Today, there was a news article about some American police again getting caught torturing innocent people. Why do they enjoy the torturing? It is the image of what it means to be knowing. A true guru wouldn't torture someone, they would benefit them. But to benefit, you need the very things that is rejected from the pathologos, specifically the logos. Also, what does the logos have? An hierarchical series of development towards true knowing, and then beyond that to wisdom, and then beyond that to phronesis, and so on. Levels. If you say, hey, you don't have to do anything, you're already at a higher level. Easy. Yes, pathologos hurts others and they think it's good. So, hey, what does every religion say? Oh, you don't have to do anything. What would it be doing? That would be going from asleep to awake. What's the work? Philosophy. Logos, dialectic, nous. You don't have to do that. Screw knowing and understanding. Just have faith. Just believe that when you die, you'll go to a good place. None of the Socrates crap, learning, experiencing it, verifying your understanding through your direct experience, using reason, understanding, all of the things that we use for everything else. Hey, if you went to an architect, say, hey, can you build my house? Can you make sure it's, are you a skilled architect or will my house fall down? They never say, oh, just have faith. Never. When you get onto a plane, do you demand knowledge and understanding from the pilot, or do you just say, oh, just believe me? I'm the right color, so therefore I'm cruel to the air hostesses, so I must be knowing, because that's what it means to be knowing, being cruel to people. Never. But some people, the grifters, trick you into not demanding understanding and knowing for yourself, for your soul, for your spiritual evolution, for learning at school, and for political, social ruling. Right. And that's called conservatism. Okay? Just by definition. And we can see it with the logos. We can use what we've learned in the logos to understand the nature and causes of not just our problems, but how it manifests in mythology, real life mythology, how it manifests in our everyday world. And so, so every grift. Hey, what did Obama say? Hope and change. Didn't say logos and change. Hope. Hope is bad. Why? Just make believe. Trust in the logos, a rational set of steps that is understandable and verifiable and open to all, leading to self-being and the one self. That's different. Every religion, hope, faith. Every con artist, hey, just trust me. That's the grifters. And instead of giving you what you need to actually make America better again, Obama, or actually make America great again, Trump, hope. So famously, these comedy networks meet Trump supporters and say, hey, by the way, you think this? Oh, yeah. Well, here are the facts. Well, I don't care about the facts. Why? Because I really, really hope that he will make things better for me. And he's saying that he will. And he's saying, and I also get to hate on people who are different than me. I like that. The same way, because it's kind of like my parents, when they said, oh, just trust me, things are going to be better. And then he beat me up or whatever. Whatever his image, they trust, they hope. They don't want to give up their faith. Because that's all that's being offered to them. Every con artist does the same thing. Thousands of religions that have existed. By definition, religion means to be bound by a saving belief. So it's not rude to say, oh yeah, by the way, that's a con. Because belief doesn't get you to the logos, which gets you from asleep to awake. Oh no, but I like it. But it teaches good morals. It doesn't. It tells you that it does. As does every conservative party or right-wing party. Hey, what does Hitler say? Oh, you've got problems. Yeah, it's the Jews' fault. So we can solve problems and we don't have to understand and learn together through the logos. Instead, we can just harm the Jews. Oh, and the whole thing was an entire freaking grift. There you go. What do you know? And it almost took over the world. That's how powerful this relationship is. So, right, fascism, yeah. That's what conservative means. Not going to change. I'm conserving the way I think. I'm not learning. I already am better because I am. And I shouldn't pay taxes. Oh, by the way, actually, taxes will benefit you significantly because people making billions and billions are not paying taxes, and you are. Shut up. Don't ask questions. Have faith. Leopards are eating your face. All right? Point this out, and what's the common reaction? Oh, but the left are no better. Well, of course the left are better. They're way better than this. Way freaking better than this. They're not ideal, though. Why? Well, the difference is they don't appeal in this way. They're not grifting in this way. In fact, this is the counter to all of the Andrew Tates and the Ben Shapiros and the Petersons and all those sorts of people who play to this grift. Well, the left are not offering anything for young men. So these are grifters lying to men about how they can abuse women. That puts them higher in the hierarchy without actually learning anything. You're already great. Now give me money. They say, well, but the left are not. But the left. Well, yeah, that's because the left are not grifting in this way. They're not saying you already know and you're already better. They're not saying it's good to harm others. It's good to exploit the resources. It's good to exploit the planet. They're not actively making that their whole state of being. They're not the Pathologos party. Then why are we not getting change? Well, let's see. What's their party? What's the opposite of conservative, traditionally speaking? What's the false dichotomy? Conservative versus progressive. The left is the progressive party. Now, of course, almost always in capitalism, you will never find actual progression. Why? Because the nature of capitalism functions so that people with money are rewarded and therefore can make more money, and then they will start to buy the politicians, influence the elections, change the game. That's what monopoly was invented to show. The rich will always get richer and the poor will get exploited in capitalism. That's a function of it. So they will tell you that they're progressives and they will be lying to you. Why? What is involved in progression? Well, if stagnation or conservatism is stagnation, this kind of ousia and stuck, then what's the opposite? What's that a shadow of? What's progressive? Ousia that uses the self-logos, self logos reflects on the ideas of self-being, the self-er terms, self-er or being or truth, that are of the self, and then sees the self in a new way and goes up. Progression. And that's called the dialectic. Say it with me at home. Dialectic. That's a dialectic. That's what progression is. By definition, not opinion, not because I like that idea, not because my parents told me that, not because my religion told me that. By the logos. Objectively, that's what it is. If you are a progressive party, you should be the dialectic party. Using the self logos on the self-er ideas and being as truth, using that as a paradigm to know the self, and in the act of doing so, you will develop through an actual hierarchy and progression through an actual high, how do you spell hierarchy, chat? Capitalism works if in favor of its own mercantilism. Well, capitalism is the idea that maximizing personal profits is the be-all and end-all. There's no logos. There's no idea of benefit. There's no idea of self. There's just try and get the most for yourself and screw over everything if you can get away with it. Now, they said, well, hang on a second. That doesn't seem like it's going to benefit anyone. And what do they say? Oh, trust me. Have faith. Why? They called it the invisible hand. Oh, there's a magical hand that if everyone is trying to fuck over or screw over everybody else, then somehow we're all going to benefit. I should make a note that I should take out the swears. Can you swear on Twitch and YouTube? Probably. I don't know anyway. Oh, you can? Good. I don't have to go through and... Yeah, they called it the invisible hand. And the guy who used that word tried to retract it, but then, no, I don't care. I like the idea of exploiting everyone. So the rich get richer by definition and change the rules of the game and so on and so on. There's no logos that shows by everybody seeking their own personal development, trying to push the costs onto the planet, make iPhones that break so people can buy more iPhones. The word is fiduciary responsibility. Famously, there's like a movie called The Corporate Guys, I think. Bunch of protesters on the front lawn of the CEO of Shell and saying, you are poisoning the planet and exploiting all the people who mine the oil and use the oil for your own personal profits. He came out and said, yeah, I know. Of course I do. And they're like, but that's bad. And he goes, yeah, I know. And they're like, but we're here to protest you for being evil. And he goes, no, you're missing the point. I have a legal responsibility, legally within capitalism, to do what? Maximize personal profits for my shareholders at the expense of everything else. That's called fiduciary responsibility. If I don't, I will get sued and I will lose my job. And then someone else will take my place and keep continuing to screw over everyone to make billionaires richer. And then his wife came out with some tea and cookies for everybody, all the protesters in his yard. Chilling, but true. What did they not do? They used the idea of good versus evil. That's missing the point. Use the dialectic. Trace the causes. Oh, what's that? We have iPhones that are programmed to break within 3 years as soon as the warranty comes out. Exploiting all of the miners of the resources. Exploiting workers who have to keep working to keep buying new iPhones. Destroying the planet with its pollution. Causing the animals in the ocean to eat all of the plastics in the ocean that harms the animals and harms us, slowly destroying the human race. Of course they do. How are you going to sell iPhones if they don't break? And hey, they got to pay rent next month. They got to keep selling crap because landlords exist. No one gets a free house, bud. Yeah. Sick workers can't maximize my profits, or a tired one, yeah. Right, and then you can introduce the logos. Actually, we would all benefit if, instead of everybody thinking that it's good to harm others and the planet for their own personal gain, without realizing that there are people like the 1% or the 0.01% at the top who have the whole of everything, and we're just fighting over the crumbs. Like, why do the people defend Elon? Why do the poor people defend Trump? Why do the impoverished defend Musk? They've been conned. All right. So what's the idea? Well, actual progression. So, through an actual hierarchy that we call the dialectic. The dialectic is the process, but it's also the hierarchy. H-E-I-R-A-C-H-Y. There is a hierarchy in development. Just us being able to recognize there is a lesser and a greater of... Just able to recognize there is a lesser of the pathologos and a greater of the logos tells us there is a lesser and greater levels, meaning there is necessarily a hierarchical development. But also, that must mean there is the shadow of the hierarchical development, which is what? Racism. Why? Well, oops. What do all grifters try and sell people on? This. The shadow of the hierarchy. Men are better just because. Christians are better just because. Jews are better just because. Non-immigrants are better just because. You are higher up in the hierarchy just because. No actual dialectic, no actual development. That's why these right-wing grifters cater towards young men, like 12 to 18-year-old men primarily. They don't know enough about the logos and the world to recognize they're being conned, but they said, oh, you're better because women suck. When they get old, the narrative changes. The other races suck, and then they join the KKK or they vote for Trump or whatever. That's what it is. It's the shadow of the actual hierarchy, the lesser version of the greater. Meaning if there is lesser and greater levels, there is an actual hierarchy that we could be learning. So, is the left it? No. Why? Because left and right... So from this we can make a conclusion. So we take all this, synthesize it together and make our conclusion to understand the nature of our world that we're living in. So therefore what? Therefore, conclusion. Therefore, let's zoom in a little bit. Right. Yes, send them to war and solidify their pathologos. Therefore, politics is wrong to use the image of left and right as these are commensurate opposites, like asleep to awake, or specific for what we're interested in right now, or forgetting to remembering. Actual, true, true knowledge, which happens according to the text via dialectic, self, logos, and nous. Right? The whole political con can be summed up in one image that gets taught to us from day one. Left versus right. I saw a guy I hadn't seen in a few years. Oh, you're still left wing or you're right wing? They say when you're young, if you're not left wing, you've got no heart. But if you're not right wing when you're old, you've got no brain. Therefore, that's why when people get older, they get more right wing. No. People get older who haven't done the dialectic and removed their pathologos and developed an understanding of the dialectic and self-logos and nous. They haven't done their proper work, as Socrates is calling it. Get more entrenched with their ignorance, stay asleep. That's true. Doesn't make you smarter. It can make you more certain in your ignorance. That's for sure. And the whole premise of his question, left versus right, implies this kind of movement of opposites that happen in the physical world. It's not left versus right. We are seeing, by definition, it's actually lesser versus greater. That should be the question. Are you for the lesser party, the ignorance party, or the greater party, the development party? Lesser, so that's actually which is... So that's actually lesser versus greater in relationship. In relationship. Relationship. Now, so that's relationship, but the other side is being, which is in nature, not relationship, but what's its nature? Pathologos versus self-logos dialectic. So that would be the party names. Right. Right. Even it's in the chat, even the metaphor of wings. You need both wings, which is implied in the metaphor. You need left and right wing. Yeah. Okay? So what's the implications of seeing this? Just two simple relationships, very simply outlined in the Phaedo that we have seen for ourselves because we're playing the game that Socrates encourages us to do. So easy, isn't it? What do you say, Owen?
Wow.
Right. So, push the implication. So what follows from this? This is the so you could say this top part is a definition. It's actually, the definition is actually lesser and greater. How does that function? In nature, it would be pathologos versus dialectic. But you could say, push the implications to the division set. Need a gamer sound. Like what? This one? I need more gamer sounds. So push the implication of that. Therefore, so we're just doing the dialectic now. Therefore, the political parties. So this would be self to others. So how does it relate to politics? Of course, we're not encouraged to do it with politics, but this is an example of how we can use the dialectic that we normally use for our own personal development, but use it to understand the nature of our world, but also solve problems in our world. Ever realize that humans' war and tragedy and suffering and exploitation continues? Therefore, we need to awaken philosophy in the world, which means awakening the dialectic, which gives us what we need to solve our problems.
Wow.
Philosophers are the original gamer. They're the archetype. You'll see this recognition of a world that is in problem, in chaos, and the hero has to go through a journey in the video game or in the film to discover something new, come back to his real world and solve the problem. That's the hero's journey. That's what we're doing. That's the archetype is the philosophy journey. We've been using that as a metaphor all the way through. It's the most apt. It's literally what we're here to do. So what are we here to rediscover? Well, Socrates is our Gandalf figure.
I'm looking for someone to share in an adventure.
On his last day, he gave us this. He gave us what we need to solve our problems. Thankfully. So we give him a round of applause. Right, and we realized that we were NPCs in the game following the program of our lesser pathologos, but we can be introduced to the new world, which is accepting the call to adventure by accepting the quest of philosophy, awaken philosophy, which means we have to learn something that we then take back to where we started. The thing that we learn, we're saying, seems to be the dialectic. Socrates is saying. Not only that, the act of learning something during a process that you then turn back around to the start is literally the dialectic too. Other back to self. Remember, we did it earlier. Let's have a look at what we did earlier. We did a dialectic on phronesis. We started by defining it based on what we know already. It's a background process. If phronesis is... I forgot what the definition was. I didn't write it down. Some sort of background process. Then we said, okay, how does it demonstrate itself? So now we're functioning in the world, in the hero's journey. It's functioning implication. We didn't write everything down. We didn't write it all down, but it was unifies our cognitive functions. There's a whole bunch. I didn't write it down. In fact, I'm going to get an email from the chat because it was his dialectic and he has to write it down and send it to me and I'll grade it. I won't grade it. I'll enjoy it. So we start with a definition. We start at home. Then we have to function in the world. We have to function with what we've got. But then we go through a journey through all of the divisions. That's stage 3. So we saw that phronesis helps us relate to people in need. We can benefit them artfully. We can apply it with the logos in our self-reflection to teach ourselves. It will improve our learning. We learn faster. We can understand animals better. We can give birth to other good questions about self and learning and so on. And then from these, we take something away. So there was an old English word, I forget what it was, an old English word that best summarizes all of these parts that we can take back to understand our subject better. So next time somebody asks the chatter, what's phronesis? This word. What was the word? The grades are between P and A because Aristotle was a tyrant and Plato wasn't. Yeah, Aristotle began that Latin lineage in the physical world away from the world of being. So okay. The chatter is going to do the dialectic and come back with me. After having gone through that, he will pick out a word. Oh, what is it? Ingetted. Okay. I'm going to encourage you to pick an English word, or one of these ideas that you think both represents phronesis the best, or is most interesting to you, or most illuminating. And then that's what you do in the last step. You take that back to self to understand the subject in the new way. It is English. Well, I don't know that word. Pick something else. Find, or think about it. Spend some time. Spend a week on it. Talk to your friends about it. Talk to your teachers about it. See what you come up with. You might want to go through this a few times. One of these, like, you know what? Learning fast was the best one. I think everything else is incorporated within learning fast. So take that back. What is phronesis? It's what I started with. It's some sort of background process of your mind that allows you to learn fast. I know you don't know. This is a hypothesis. It's just an if. And as we go through the Phaedo, I've turned the tables on my chatter. As we go through the Phaedo, you can improve this. You'll do a new one. I learned something more about phronesis. Not only is it a background process that from my first dialectic, I want to say it helps you learn fast. It's also this thing, and then do another one. You are evolving, you're progressing. You don't have to get it right. You're not supposed to get it right the first time. That's the conservative party. You're born being right. So, the hero's journey involves a movement that actually follows this. The dialectic is the hero's journey. You go back to the beginning with a new understanding that allows you to relate to the old world in a better way, in which you can benefit the home artfully. You can help those that were in need. These were terms in your dialectic that help you see the dialectic. That's the levels to it. So not only do you learn about your subject, you learn about the dialectic itself. So when you finish the dialectic, the chatter's going to do one on phronesis. Doesn't have to be right. He's got enough here already. He's going to not only learn something new about phronesis, he's going to ask a different question. This is the lesser to greater, not just of the subject, but the greater. Parts to whole. Not just the part, which was a dialectic on phronesis, but the whole. What did you learn about dialectic itself? This is an anagogic movement. Do both. And if you can use the words in your dialectic. Well, by returning back in the hero's journey, the hero can benefit people. That's in there. He can help those in need. Yeah, that's the start. The first world is in need. There, he's able to help others and learn more fast himself. He's become a more evolved person. Yep. So you're learning about the dialectic and the hero's journey. Call no one a philosopher who doesn't return home to alleviate the suffering of others, from the chat. So, this is why the philosopher is the true gamer. you're being a gamer in the real world, or a true hero's journey person, or a true Jedi, or a true, what's Harry Potter? Magic? I know the Moguls don't have magic, but what's the name of somebody who has magic that Harry Potter is? You take a dog to the vet to make it better and the body to the doctor. Why not take your soul to the philosopher? Yes. Exactly. So you just used lesser to greater in analogy to muggles. But what's the opposite of a muggle? So you've used that lesser to greater relationship to move anagogically from taking a dog to a vet up to lesser to the greater, taking the body to a doctor, to the ultimate magic user. Yeah. Soul to a philosopher, which is cool. So we give you a round of applause for the chat. So, let's think about what we've said so far and then come back. We'll have a break and we'll come back and we'll see if we can come to a conclusion. Through what? Through going through the hero's journey, which is the dialectic, the journey itself. But the new thing the hero learns, according to Socrates, is the dialectic too. As above, so below. So can we take the dialectic back to our home world, the physical world that we're in? We're all in here together in this physical world, to understand the nature of politics and why we have not yet been able to solve problems and they just continue to repeat. Using our dialectic that starts with our recognition that there are two kinds of basic relationships that Socrates has been talking about. Can we use that learning from the text, take it home with us, and apply it to our world to understand what's this left versus right, conservative versus progressive thing that's going on? How can we really understand it and figure it out and solve it so that we can actually progress together? Overcome this hurdle and find the next one. Find a better class of problems that we can address together in the world. Sound interesting? I think so. I think isn't this fun? Isn't this kick ass? I think it kicks ass. It's the best thing in the world. I think even by definition. On that note, I hope to see you soon.